Jesus is in the business of bringing life and freedom everywhere he goes, and he's inviting us to join him. What is human trafficking? The exploitation of vulnerable people for their bodies and labor. Right now, there are more people enslaved than any other time in history. The trafficking and exploitation of humans for their bodies and labor generates an average of $150 billion per year. It happens in every country, and there are an estimated 50 million people living in slavery today. That means this very second, there are more people in slavery than any other point in history. Slavery exists today around the world and in our own communities, and it affects millions of people, young and old, men and women, from every walk of life.
Growing up, heartbreak and terror were my default emotions.
For as long as I can remember, violence from rival tribes plagued my village.
During one of their attacks, my whole family was killed.
So I ran.
I crossed the border into a neighboring country, hoping to find some semblance of safety and security.
It was there that I met a man who promised me to help me build a new life.
But all of that was a lie. Instead of helping me rebuild, he took everything, including my legal identification.
And then he locked me up in a small, dark room, hopeless and alone.
What I thought was my path to freedom only brought more darkness.
The next day, traffickers forced me to work in the desert, doing hard labor.
When I asked for food or payment, they threatened to shoot me.
And anytime something went wrong, even if it wasn't my fault,
I would be beaten.
The beatings got so bad that I couldn't work anymore. So he left me to die in the streets.
But thankfully, by the grace of God, they returned my legal documents to me.
there I was, left for dead on an empty street alone in the desert, fighting for my life.
And miraculously, I survived the injuries. I got back up on my feet and I made my way to Greece.
There, I was accepted into a refugee camp, identified as a victim of human trafficking, and referred to A21 for support.
I got in touch with members of the A21 team.
Was granted asylum by the government.
And brought into the A21 Freedom Center in Thessaloniki to be a part of the aftercare program there.
During this time, I attended a number of life programs.
And job readiness sessions that prepared me to stand on my own 2 feet.
Today, because of the help I received at A21,
I have a job.
I'm living in my own apartment.
And, you know, my life is better and my future is brighter than I imagined was possible.
The problem may be great, but our God is greater, and He is calling us to partner with Him in the work He is already doing to end the evil of human trafficking. Change is possible, and we get to be a part of the solution. Throughout history, the Church of Jesus Christ has been leading the charge in the fight against the horrors of slavery. Countless victories have been won because of the faithful efforts of men and women committed to the cause of Christ. But the fight isn't over. There is still work to be done. Thankfully, though, the church is more equipped with the people, resources, and passion needed to end slavery in our lifetime. How can we do it? We start small, because doing big things always starts with doing small things. We trust God, because our God has the power to multiply our small efforts into an exponential difference. And we do what we can, which is often far more than we think.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a very special night where across all of our locations, we will stand together for those who are vulnerable to fight human trafficking. My name is Nick Domasic. I am one of your youth pastors from our Keller, Texas location. Shout out to my Texas people. I am so excited to be here today for our third year in a row taking on this fight. I believe God is going to do something special. And here's what I want you to know. Jesus is still in the business of bringing life and freedom everywhere he goes. And he is inviting us to join him. We can trace all the way back through history. We can go through the Bible and we find ourselves at the second book of Exodus, where we meet a man named Moses. Moses was an ordinary man that God used to accomplish an extraordinary task. You see, Moses was born a slave. He was an Israelite, and the Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians. The Egyptians were led by Pharaoh. And through a series of events, Pharaoh's daughter began to raise Moses. And so as Moses gets older, God tasks Moses to break the Israelites out of slavery. Here's what he tells Moses in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verses 7 through 10. It says, "Then the Lord told him, I've certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of my people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt." What do we learn? That God is still in the business of setting people free. And God can use a slave like Moses to set other slaves free. And the truth is, we're all slaves. We are all slaves to this thing called sin. Sin is the disconnect from God. It's the decisions we make that take us away from our relationship with the Father. And we're in a broken world. We're all slaves to sin. But Jesus is still in the business of setting people free. So God sent Jesus. Who was Jesus? He was the Son of God, perfect in every single way, lived a perfect life on earth. At the end of his life, he gave his life for us, the perfect sacrifice, so that we could be made right with God. But that wasn't the end of the story, because 3 days later, he rose from the dead, in that moment defeating death, hell, and the grave, giving us that opportunity to have that relationship and to be forgiven. It was Jesus' own words that said this in the book of Luke. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, and that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come." Jesus sets us free from sin so we can set others free. God can use a slave like Moses to free other slaves. God can use us to set people free. Why? Because Jesus is still in the business of bringing life and freedom everywhere he goes, and he's inviting us to join him. You know, it's through his incredible mercy and grace that he gives us this forgiveness and this gift of salvation. And it reminds me of a really famous hymn. Maybe you've heard it before. It's called Amazing Grace. And the lyrics go like this: "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see." This song has a really unique story behind it. It was written by a man named John Newton. What you have to know about John Newton is he was around in the 1700s. And at age 11, he began to work in the slave industry. So he owned slaves, and by the time he became an adult, he was the captain of several slave ships. And John Newton found himself in the middle of the ocean on a boat. He was in the middle of a terrible storm. His boat was being thrown around, and he thought that he was going to lose his life. And so in that moment, he had an encounter with Jesus, and his life changed forever as he gave it to Christ. You see, what John Newton learned is that God was not here to condone slavery, but God is in the business of setting people free. And so John Newton went from a slave driver to an abolitionist. He was fighting slavery. So God can use a slave to free slaves. He can set us free from our sin to free others. And he can use a sinner like John Newton to set slaves free. What I want you to know is that today God is calling us, you and I, to fight for those who are vulnerable, to stand against human trafficking. And this may be a big problem, but we have a bigger God. And when we stand together, we can play a part in God's plan to set the captives free.
None of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. And when you take all of our somethings, add them together, and multiply them by the power of God, we can do really big things.
Hi, my name's Gracie, and I was a student at Switch. Last year at Switch Fights, I felt called to give because God put on my heart that I should be able to help these people that are in one of the worst situations I could ever think of. And I wanted to be able to help however I could. I asked my parents and aunts and uncles, family, friends, and obviously some of my own money. And I just wanted to get as much as I could to help in the biggest way I could. Whether God calls you to give $1 or $500, as long as you're obedient to what He's calling you to do, it's gonna help no matter what. I think I'm different now because I've become more aware of what's happening, and I feel more called to help. If you're nervous to give or you feel like your contribution won't matter, as long as you're following what God is calling you to do, then every dollar matters.
Gracie did something, but she wasn't the only one. She was one of thousands of students just like you who brought their something, and when you added it all together as a whole, we raised more than $50,000. And because we are all about the capital C Church, the family of God spread across the globe, we added our something to the 15 plus years of something that our global mission partners like A21 have been doing to make a difference.
Jesus is still in the business of bringing life and freedom wherever He goes. And He is inviting us to join Him. So maybe today is the first time you're hearing about human trafficking. And it's a big fight. It's a real problem. But we serve a bigger God. And so I want to give you 3 tangible steps you can take right now to fight the battle of human trafficking. We're gonna share, we're gonna pray, and we're gonna give. Number 1, we're gonna share. The most powerful thing we can do when we are joining the battle of human trafficking is share the good news of the gospel. We wanna tell people about who Jesus is, because the more people that come to know Jesus, the more lives that are changed forever. So we're gonna share the gospel. We're gonna tell people about the life of Jesus and that they can be saved by believing in Him. Who do you know that doesn't have a relationship with God? Maybe you invite them to Switch, or you bring them to church on the weekend, or you share the good news with them. We're gonna share the gospel, but we're also gonna share awareness. It's so important that we tell people about human trafficking. And this is something you can do beyond this moment right here. As you leave and you go out into the world, tell people about this problem. Because the more people who know, the more people join the fight. It was 2 years ago when I had an opportunity to go with an organization called A21 and do a walk for freedom in Dallas, Texas. We gathered together with hundreds of people and we walked silently, but we held signs and we brought awareness to human trafficking. And we saw so many people join the fight. For every person we educate, we see another person step in and fight alongside us. And together, we can stop human trafficking. We're gonna share. Number 2, we're gonna pray. Prayer is our direct line of communication to God. We're gonna invite the creator of the universe to join us in this fight. And so what can we pray for? I wanna give you some specific things that you can pray for right now. We're gonna pray for people who are currently enslaved. We're gonna pray for Switch as we stand to fight. We'll pray for organizations already working against human trafficking. We'll pray for strength and wisdom for those leading the charge. We'll pray for God to continue setting the captives free. And we will pray for oppressors to turn away from their sin. Prayer is inviting the creator of the universe to join us. And God is still in the business of setting people free. So we're gonna allow him to guide our steps and bring us wisdom in this fight. We're gonna share, we're gonna pray, and we're gonna give. Across all of our locations, there's gonna be an opportunity for us to give to local and global missions. Every dollar given is gonna go to organizations that help people who are vulnerable, who are at risk for human trafficking. It's gonna go to organizations like A21 who are boots on the ground fighting this problem. Every single gift is gonna make an impact. Over the past couple years, we have raised over $50,000 to fight this battle. Why? Because we lead the way with a rational generosity. We truly believe it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. And today, we will stand in a rational generosity. Your gift that you give, whether it's $5 or more than that, is gonna make an impact to set people free. All of these gifts will help vulnerable people. And so what can you do? Maybe you give $5. Maybe God is calling you to do more than that. Whatever it is, I want you to know that gift will change the world. Why? Because Jesus is still in the business of bringing life and freedom everywhere he goes. And he is inviting us to join him. So we will share, we will pray, and we will give. And when we stand together, we can play a part in God's plan to set the captives free.